Convergence is a giant topic. And I mean, we only had 2 days here. You could spend 2 weeks because the landscape is so big. But what's been very interesting to me, because I've been involved in several different kinds of technology convergence as well as the security management convergence. And oh, I didn't even say much about me. Did you all have a chance to read my speaker description? Okay, so my original engineering background was auto body design. And that was in Detroit, which is where I grew up and went to school. Well, I actually lived down in the farming area, but went to school in Detroit. And so I started off in engineering because my dad was an engineer, and I started like engineering school when I was about 4 years old. He was colorblind, and he couldn't read color coding on resistors and stuff. He was in electronics. And so I would stay at his workbench, and he had a business at home, and he was the programming director for a radio station, both things. So, classical music station. So I had the cool thing of having my dad be on the radio. When you're a kid, that's kind of a big status thing. But I originally went to school to major in English, and then so coincidentally, the day I started, the Detroit News had a giant headline, excess, what do they call it? It's the opposite of a shortage, when there's too many. 3,000 teachers that are unemployed or like working at the supermarket or something like this. So I said, wow, I'm going to have to change what I do pretty quick. I guess I better do something in engineering, because what else would I do? So skipping ahead, I ended up working in auto body design, and this was a cool thing when you're right out of school. Cool cars, you know about the at that time it was a 7-year cycle to make a car. Now it's only 3 because of computers. And that's how I lost my job, computers. And the writing was on the wall that they were going, computers were going to come in and they were going to do all the design there, because there was so much work, so many drawings, so many human error type mistakes and so on, and that are costly if they have 1,000 cars in production. And that was one of the jobs I liked because it paid a lot of overtime. But the Pontiac Fiero car had already made 1,000 models, and they had a test track that was a 1-mile track, but if you drive the car around it for a week, it's the equivalent of 100,000 miles. So they called it the 100,000 track. So it's 100,000 miles beating out. There were salt sprays. It's like a weird looking thing. It looks like a small racetrack, but it's got all this equipment and stuff on it. And then they would stop it, and then there's heat lamps, like you park your car in the sun all day and all this kind of stuff. Anyway, they did the test, and a crack was developing in the floor plan where the passengers' feet were. And so they had to stop production. So now I liked these jobs because they were, hurry up, you got to get this done quick. So everybody answers your questions quickly. You're never waiting for anything. So, but that's the kind of thing they don't want, and that's the kind of thing that they were trying to get computers in here to fix. So we went back to school, and actually I had to go to 3 different universities because at that time each car company had its own. One had CATIA system, the other one had computer vision, the other one had Prime, because I didn't want to have the same system as their competitor. So we went through all that for a year, and going to school at night and all this kind of stuff. And then when we went into HR, they said, we were so excited to talk about what we were doing on the computer and the design work and stuff, which is really more like AutoCAD 1.0, just having graduated from Etch-a-Sketch. I mean, it was primitive stuff. And they said, boy, too bad you guys didn't tell us this. You're at the top pay rate. You can work on the computer server. You'd have to take a 2/3 pay cut. That's the whole justification for bringing the computers in, is that they can let all the old guys, quote unquote, go and get kids out of school, and they could do the work of 10 engineers with a computer. Well, it took decades before that ever came about. But anyway, so everywhere we went, and we were already involved in industrial automation because to design a part right, you had to know how they could make it and what were the capabilities on the line, and that was an evolving thing at the time. So we said, hey, well then let's get into computers. So we did all kinds of very interesting software, but in the interest of time, I won't go into that. That's not Convergence. but my first experience with Convergence was way back when the first Convergence conference was held in the United States. And you'll probably never guess the year because it was 1974. It was by SAE, the Society of Automotive Engineers, because they had the computer control module that would sit in your car, and they put it under the seat, passenger seat, mainly because that's a central point from which to run wires. Okay, so then what happened is nobody thought about it much. They had it. There was no back seat in the cargo van vehicles. And so there's just this little hump on the floor with a metal plate on it. But when the buyers started, when the customers started taking their cars and going to a quarter car wash, coming through the front seat and spray out the whole thing, they start driving their car down the road and suddenly it quits because the computer module got done. So the second Convergence conference had a quote on its on the homepage for the conference that said, "You don't want your computer to reboot when you're negotiating a high-speed turn." This is the car computer. So the first conference had 300 people. But by 2004, 8,000 engineers would converge on Detroit for the Convergence conference. And that was a week-long thing. And so that was my first introduction to cyber physical systems and the need for CIA being applied to a computer in the car. And so, fast forward, skipping over all the IT background, we had a client, an industrial controls client, that had a computer that quit working. The motherboard broke, and so they put in an XT motherboard in, same hard drive, plug it in, fire it up, went fine, but it wouldn't stop talking to the control panel for the access system. And this was early 1990s, I think. And so, no, actually it was in the late 80s. It was in the late 80s. So this seemed weird, so we went to it, and it had GW Basic running. That was the software on it, so we had the source code there. So the control panel was set for 9600 baud because the only two settings were 9600 and 12, and it didn't work if you did 1200. And I said, well, this is kind of weird because a PC can't even do 1200, let alone 9600, and the only way it would work before is if you had it at 9600. So the first thing I thought of was the only thing that changes in XT is faster. So maybe it's talking to the panel too fast. So in 5 minutes, we had to talk to the panel because all we did was put a little delay between sending each character out. This was sort of like, let's test our thesis. Let's see what we think. So they were all excited. The manufacturer had been trying to figure out what to do for 4 months. I wasn't too impressed with them because if they couldn't get it to work at 1200 baud and you had to use 9600, and obviously they were getting buffer overrun because we were sending stuff too fast, how could it even work at 9600? The panel can't be capable of it either. So anyway, so that was the first access control company we did business with, and we ended up doing business with a lot of them. And so my original, let me go to the next thing here. There's two categories of convergence that we deal with, and in the physical security industry, they got mushed together. And that's happened in other industries too, but worse in physical security. So the two categories are information technology convergence, which is the adoption of information technology in cyber physical systems. And that's happening in every industry, everywhere. That's IoT, that's all that kind of stuff. The second kind is security management convergence, which for years, every so often, some organizations try to say we're gonna combine IT security and physical security together. And Microsoft tried it. After 2 years, they gave it up. They wrote a nice white paper about it as to why they did. And gosh, I forgot to send a note to all my the marketing spammers that I was in a talk. Let me turn the switch. There we go. And so that didn't work. And they were good enough to write a white paper about why it didn't work. A bunch of different reasons. Payroll differences was one. A lot more pay to the IT guys and to the physical security guys and so on. And there were hard feelings. And a lot of it had a lot more to do with people issues than anything else. But what they did is all the points of collaboration that they were trying to put in place, they went ahead and kept them in place. Well, they did put them in place. They kept them in place. They just kept the two functions separate. So, and then from there on, that collaboration continued. So the second time I saw that, I mean that I was involved in one myself, was I'm just trying to remember what my NDAs say. So, so this was an electric utility company, and they wanted to combine the network SOC, the NOC. They wanted to combine the network operating center with the SOC, put them together. Sounds good, but then the next thing you know, the security operators are using a microphone, talking to people that are at the building front door with an intercom and all this, and it's distracting and noisy to everybody else. And there were a bunch of other friction points like that, and they said, shoot, so they build them separate office space, actually really acoustic paneling and all this kind of stuff. And the next thing you say, trying to do it in the same physical space doesn't work. But the collaboration on incident response, their insider threat elements, emergency response to situation, safety response, this kind of thing. There were a lot of touch points they found, and so they kept those going forward, but again, they didn't combine the thing. Now I'm seeing Silicon Valley. Here we hear it again. You got to converge security. And of course, this conference is, Converge Security. But the best reference that I found on that is from CISA. And you're the one who mentions CISA to me all the time. Not all the time, but frequently. And they have a great definition. It's similar to this. I adjusted it to fit the conference. Close collaboration between, I'm saying, digital security and physical security management. And that is exactly what they say. There's a reference page here for some books and websites to go to and so on. But there are two references from them that are great, and one of them is a guide to converging security management. They just call it security convergence. It's the first common sense thing I've seen. So I think I might have some other good slides. The main thing that I learned, though, in all of these deals is that most of the understanding you have still applies. Whatever domain you're in, if you're part of one domain and you're converging with another, and I'm going to keep using that term even though I think it's not quite accurate to call it convergence, but everything stays the same, but you just expand it some. That's my general experience. And so this is the CIA triangle. Who's not familiar with it? Anybody not? Okay. So confidentiality, getting authorized access to data. Now it's to systems and devices. So that has to extend out. And the problem with the cyber-physical system is if something goes wrong, depending on the system, there can be catastrophic results. In fact, Bruce Schneier, his most recent book a couple years ago was called Click Here to Kill Everybody. Which obviously a clickbait title. But the same thinking that we have still applies, but we just have to do more of it. And so Availability, same kind of thing, but it's now the availability of both. The automated functionality and the things you're integrating with, that, plus the user control, whatever the user interaction is. So those are different dimensions. And then integrity, of course, means not just the integrity of data anymore, but the integrity of the control. If you turn right in the car, it's got to go all the way around the corner, not part way. So that's a good thing, and that's what I find mostly the biggest lesson learned is that there's less to learn than you might think. So I already spoke about this before, and whatever I was going to say now, I already said. So I'm going to go on to the next. So one of the things that Bruce Schneier has been saying in the recent years, and that I found to be so applicable in one of his sessions. So I used to have Bruce come in and speak. I ran the CardTech, SecureTech physical security track for years for them. And I always brought him as a headline speaker, which they said to me, okay. But he was the first speaker of the day, and then the rest. And we discussed at one point the fact that we think in models, but we don't realize that we think in models. You know, people call them stereotypes if they have to do with people, but when we think about our job and our work, we have our own set of thoughts that represent work as far as we experience it. And so that's our model of work, and that's our thinking. And so one of the very simple points that it's one of those obvious things that, you know, you should have thought of it before, but, you know, at least somebody did. But he said, all models are flawed. If they were a perfect model, they'd be an exact duplicate of the same thing. They'd be the whole thing in its entirety. And you can't work with that. You got to work with models to be able to think and do things in the abstract, but that relate to the concrete. So he said, all models are flawed. Some are useful. So the point is, when we're using a model, are we aware, are we at the limits of usability or what? And so that could be a talk in itself. But that's what I want to do today is expand our thinking and change the model we have about convergence based on what my experience has been and the experience of a lot of other people over 20-some years, well, maybe it's more, about convergence. So this is the concept. That's what we're trying to do, is that. We're trying to get a nice, smooth convergence thing. And so a thing, and I have this in my lessons learned summary, when you're starting off thinking about convergence or any kind of project, you start off, you think of the end result, but somewhere in the mix you collide with the starting point. And so assessing what the current state is, in fact, that's one of the recommendations from CISA. First thing you do before you even talk about convergence, assessment. Do a cybersecurity assessment right now. That's the first thing to do. Then you know where you stand, then you have somewhere to go. So, and that's the thing about the starting point, is that we kind of think of it very simple, but in reality, when you get out there to try to work with it, that's what it looks like. So, you know, you can, one at a time, tackle each roadway. You can get all that, but what kind of scope, what kind of resources did you have allocated, and so on. And what we're trying to do is we're trying to get this. And so, you know, people are doing it, so we know it can be done. But when it comes to convergence, every organization is so different. Different with their people, processes, policies they have, and procedures, and the technology deployments. Never, ever. Even in a company that has 10 sites and they want them all to be the same. You know that's not the case. They're going to be identical. Some can be close if it's all really well managed. But those differences don't matter. What matters is the end result you get. And it's okay for them to be different. In fact, for years in physical security, as organizations got larger and you had more corporate security functions, besides just doing corporate investigations and travel security, once it went beyond that to the organizational stuff, you had security managers and directors that were trying to standardize the security system deployments across all the sites. And unless they're all a rubber stamp site, exactly like another with the same number of employees and the same spots and desks and everything, it's not workable. But what is workable, though, is there's a problem that can come up if you don't do a good enough job on security all around. A big national bank had a situation about 8 years ago where they had a fire in one of their facilities, and they thought they were safe because they always do exactly what the fire marshal or the AHJ, whatever the title of the guy is, often the fire marshal, what they say to do. You do it, we're safe. But what happened is they did have physical injuries, and the attorneys, Discovery and all this, they hired consultants to come in and do a security assessment of the facilities. And I mean, sorry, not security assessment, but a fire protection assessment and fire safety. And they found there were a lot of differences. And this one actually had the least protections. That's understandable, though. If you're in Long Beach, it's one, and you have a supermarket and you want to put fire in, that's one price. But if you're in Pasadena, it's going to cost you 5 times more because that's what they want to have done up there. So sometimes it has to do with, are there trees around, how vulnerable are the trees, and so on. Sometimes it's that. But what happened here to that bank is that they said you were negligent because why wouldn't you expect an accident at a place with the least protection? And man, were they scrambling. That's how I learned about the project. They had to assess 500 sites in 8 weeks. And so they were out looking for every consultant they could find that could do a fire assessment. But the point is, we don't step up to strategy and to thinking about what approach we take to convergence, which is why I like the CISA guidance, because it starts off with high-level stakeholders, what you do, and what do you do at the high level, and what do you do at the low level. And usually it's hard to get them talking to each other. Bob Burback is Chief Security Officer for a company, and he and I had kids in the same basketball team, so we used to sit on the bleachers together and swap work stories. And he had been complaining for months because the C-suite wanted him to take over IT security as well. And that was a big trend at the time. CSOs take both physical and IT. And he kept saying no, kept saying no. He said, look, I'll interview the guys, I'll help you, I'll do whatever you want, but there's no way I can do it. I have enough trouble with my email and spreadsheets. There's no way I can tackle anything else. So, okay. They went through it, they did all the interviews. Everybody that he thought was a good person there, they all turned down. And so they finally called him in one day and they said, Bob, we finally decided what we're doing on this. And he said, oh man, good. What is it? They said, you're it. You're it. You're the guy. And so it wasn't a choice. So he said, well, to do that, I've got to hire somebody who has done that work before. They said, of course you do. Let's do it. And he said, well, if you're going to do that, and he said, I think, Matthew or whatever the name of the fellow was they just interviewed, he would be great. Why don't you just bring him in? That's not going to work for us. Why? He says, because when you talk, we can understand you. And they couldn't understand anything the guys that were interviewing were saying. And so that's why they wanted him there. So they did a convergence thing, but what do? They brought in the IT guy right away. He has his functions, they have the security functions. Yes, the C-suite talks to one person, but then beyond there, it's collaboration between, but that's how it went. And that worked out pretty well. In fact, he did get a really sharp guy, and it was in a situation where they couldn't really tell him no for who he wanted and so on. So he got to do that pretty well. But how did I go there? The convergence is hard in many ways. One way is because it is it's the combination of cyber physical. It's the fact that there's the technology convergence happening. And in the physical security industry, they blurred those things both together as if it was one kind of convergence, but it was really two. But the information technology coming into a company, that was easy to do 20 years ago. Now, with exponential tech advancement, continuous delivery, DevOps, all this kind of stuff, how does that the rest of the organization is usually based on static pictures of monthly reports, weekly sales, this kind of thing. And at a small level, you're looking at like daily sales. At the store level, you're looking at it that way. But when it comes to the bigger picture, you're not. And so this physical security industry used to be buy a system and then somewhere between 5 and 10 years later, just rip it out and replace another one. And a lot of things, technologies were that way in the early stages. But we can't deal with it anymore. There are two huge shifts that are happening. One in, you could call them a sea change, but I don't like that word so much. One in physical security and one in the security and one in the IT world of technology that are impacting everything. But and these are things mostly that you know already, that technology is on this up curve. And I keep seeing all these articles about Metcalfe's law is going to expire sometime. And then, in fact, an email came in from one of the things that I subscribe to, because one famous person said, Metcalfe's law is dead, and the other one said it's alive and well. And so, but here's what happens, and this came from Ray Kurzweil, who did a lot of work researching technology trends, because he's a big inventor. Do you know Ray Kurzweil? He started out with, he was the first person to do a synthesizer and to do text to voice and speech and all this kind of stuff. He got tons of inventions. And his problem was that he used to release the products too early. You spend so much money on marketing, nobody understands what you're talking about. You get a small bit of traction, but then you've already told all your competitors exactly what you're doing, and you've been so busy explaining it to everybody that would hear about it that the secrets are out. But if you come in too late and somebody else blankets the world with this identity in their product, now it's going to cost you 10 times as much just to catch up. So he started tracking 52 different and even more than that, trends like low power, miniaturization, just all the things that combine into the accelerated pace we see of technology development, one part of it enabling another part. And so this has been, let me get to the slide that's about that. So this is a big deal about this exponential thing, and here's what I did in 2015. I looked at where, let me just walk over here and see if I can do it this way. It's a little bit easier. So in 2015, snapshot, every technology follows the same curve, but not at the same pace. And different companies involved in that technology are at their own pace too. But this is what the technology advancement, what's really happening that you can do. This is tracking that. But sometimes from one year to another, it's a different company that is advancing things. So computing power and so on, hard drive capacity. This was nice. They all spaced out very nicely, smart mobile devices and Internet of Things. And so I said, well, where is security technology? The most advanced thing we're doing security is video analytics. And so where is video analytics? And it turned out to be in here. So I put it, I gave them the benefit of the doubt, I threw it ahead, and I said, wow, wherever they are here, oh, the time scale has gone on this. That's like 2000, back there was, I think 1980, and then this was 2015 right here. So this means that the physical security system technologies are going to be ramping up like crazy. So that was a scary thought until I remembered, oh yeah, but security is so far behind IT. And the IT industry likes to say, well, we're 5 years behind IT, and then they explain why. But that's not the full reality. They're 5 years behind IT with the parts of it they try to use. But they're 15 years behind or more in adopting IT practices. And so this is a big complicating factor for security convergence, the technology side of things. For example, the first Access Communications invented the first webcam, and they started making security. They were a print server company. They came in from IT and said, hey, look at this webcam and this internet thing. And so the founder said, hey, let's make a webcam. So they did. They had the first webcam. And then they made the first security camera in 1996. 1 frame per second, standard definition, but it still worked. And so you could put it on the network. So security things started going on the networks right at the end of the 90s. And after that, after Y2K, there was a huge push to put them there because people overspent on Y2K, companies did, and then they had no money for anything. So how are they going to improve their security stuff? Well, now you could put in an access control system, but you don't have to pull all that cable everywhere. You can go to the nearest switch. That saves so much money that the smart security integrators were able to bid projects at 25 or 30% of their competitors. And for a year, they took business and nobody understood why, but that was a big deal. So, but things have been going on the network since back then. But it took until 2015 for the Security Industry Association to issue guidance to their manufacturer members on creating a MIB for their devices. Management Information Base, I'm not sure, MIB, if you're familiar with that, but it's basically something that says, here's the information you can get from this device. And then that allows you to manage all the devices because of that interface that they have to get that information. So that's like 15 years or more behind, and that's the way they are. That's why in 2004, 80% of the companies that I went to and went to their security lands, and we just did a default Nmap scan out of the box, network mapper, would take all the security cameras offline. So you'd have to make an exception list, give the IP addresses to IT, and all this kind of stuff. So they're behind. The other mega trend is technology costs fall exponentially at the same time as the capabilities are increasing. And that's an amazing thing. And here's an example. In 2018, Seagate, in their corporate Form 10K, where they report, and this is what publicly traded companies have to do, they have to report all the risks to the company of what might impact their revenue, their profitability, or shares to investors. So this is the cost, the drive capacity here, tracking it starting in 1995, and then all the way up to 2015, 4.5 cents per gigabyte. And it used to be 600 and some. And before that, it was 1,200. I know I've spent $3,000 on a 5 megabyte hard drive back in 1986. You couldn't find one that small unless you went into a historical museum. So, but Seagate said a big risk for them was price erosion because the price in the previous 2 years had dropped from 3 cents per gigabyte to 2 cents. That's a 30% drop in the price they can charge for their product. And it's an exponential thing, and it's just going to keep dropping. So this was a huge enough risk that they had to report it. Now, just like with Metcalfe's law on networking, and it applies to the same thing to all the technologies, yes, the older version of that technology can only go so far. But now we have solid-state drives. Suddenly now we have 100 terabyte drives. Whoever thought you could have a 100 terabyte drive? That was the size of the Library of Congress about 20 years ago. So this keeps increasing. So how in the world do you make any plans or do anything about convergence? And how do you converge with something that you expected to be going at 25 miles an hour and you find out it's going 80 because the speed limit's 70 and they just happen to go 80. So I went to go do a new chart because you can still find websites now that track those kind of trends and things. It's way up there. I couldn't have a comparison chart that makes sense because physical security is way down here and these guys are way up here and so on. But this is what this means. We're at two watershed moments. One is physical security, because for 50 years, for the previous 50 years, well, actually, I'll take video surveillance as an example. Video surveillance systems used to be, you know, small cameras sitting in a bay in a room where a security guard was watching, and that was the extent of the technology. And they didn't sell them very many cameras because you can only watch so many monitors. And then they had quad recorders where you could put on a VHS tape, 4 monitors instead of just 1, and then that was a big deal. And so we have all these big deals in physical security with levels of technology that were never designed to do that. A television was designed to be a television camera sending out a stream and a television set somewhere recording it. So you got to have a lot more technology than that. But broadcasting didn't need what security needs, so they didn't make it. But the big change, one of the big changes was the consumerization of tech. Now, it used to be that new information technology would go first to businesses, and then it would go to security industry, and then to consumers. Now it doesn't. It goes first to consumers, or straight to businesses, and both at the same time, and then security technology. So, but a video wall that used to cost $250,000 is now $50,000. Well, actually, it was $50,000 about 6 years ago. I just got some 50-inch TV displays for $129 at Walmart. You can put up a video wall now for a few $1,000s to do what you want. That's a big difference, $250,000 to, you know, a few $1,000s. So just like the hard drive price is dropping, that's affecting what you can do, because initially, cost and low capabilities of technology were the primary reason that video deployments have always been compromised. Never enough cameras, never doing what you really want to do. Either it costs too much or you can't manage it at scale. Managing at scale, you know that. The security industry is really bad at managing anything at scale. It's something IT learned a long time ago. You gotta automate stuff, you gotta monitor stuff. You can't just keep assigning more and more people the more stuff you get out there. But anyway, so you needed a lot of technical expertise from the security industry's point of view for installers and installations and so on. There's the big lag behind physical security, and that's just getting bigger. Systems and devices aren't manageable at scale, and the integration capabilities it's laughable to even call them integration. They're just really, really pretty poor. But now, with what's happening, capabilities and cost are not the primary constraint on what you do with how you design what you do with a physical security system deployment. It's your thinking. Because you can afford what you need to do when you want to do, but now your risk assessments have to be a lot better than they used to be. Now your understanding of the company operations has to be a lot better. The assessment part of this, or as we have called it forever in IT, requirements development. You're building a system, what are the requirements? I mean, it's kind of a simple concept, but for 50 years, the industry has been on, hey, I want what I saw across the street at that building. And so if that's all you're doing, you're going to run into problems. And that's one of the ways I got introduced to physical security. That's why I was mentioning that to you about earlier, John. But so now those things are solvable or already solved, but there's still the lag and education that has to go. In 2008, I made this diagram at the request of ASIS, the American Society for Industrial Security, in response to a request for an educational session about standards. They wanted to know about standards. And partly because there were new industry standards and they weren't working well. And at one seminar, they had a 4-day seminar, the majority of the attendees were from government facilities, and those majority of attendees were in trouble because their stuff wasn't working right and they were all mad. And so I didn't find that out until I got there. I didn't know that's why they wanted a thing on standards. But this is where it started. Standalone systems, then connected systems, then network systems, then enterprise capabilities. But I have to qualify that because they're still not manageable at enterprise scale. Who can change the passwords or update the firmware on 1,000 cameras? It takes weeks or months of people driving trucks and all this. I mean, now you can do it online. I mean, but still manually, it's a huge process. IT learned a long time ago. You got to automate all that stuff. You can't do everything manually. So interoperable solutions, and that's just emerging now. And so up until this year, I've said that's where we're at, is interoperable solutions, and people would tell me, Ray, you're absolutely crazy if you think anybody's ever going to pay for anything that could be intelligent and evolvable. And they always say, don't you mean evolving? And I said, no, I mean evolvable. It's your technology. You should be able to evolve the infrastructure to be what you want. Really? Okay. So these are all the things on the left that make this possible. And so the new one that I added was this one down here, autonomous compute infrastructure. Now, Dell first coined that term, and at first I thought it was just a marketing buzzword and a bunch of BS, and I have a column called Real Words or Buzzwords where I try to take apart people that are don't know what they're talking about. And also I want to educate people where they do know what they're talking about, but we just don't know what it means. But it turns out that they developed a framework for autonomous computing framework, and the links are on the reference slide. And what it is, it's self-managing infrastructure. They were working hand in hand with VMware to make it possible for everything AI-based. AI plays a big part in this. I don't think you can do a technology session today without saying AI at least once. But now it manages itself, and that's a huge deal. And so now that top thing is possible. You can take a rack of 4 servers, put it in because you want to add some storage and compute power, and the infrastructure management software, Dell calls theirs Open Manage, but that will automatically, the AI has been watching the workloads and so on, so it will automatically decide based on the new storage capabilities, the new GPUs and CPUs and all this, what workload should be running where, on what VMs. And they act on what servers, physical servers, and they will migrate VMs from one server to another. At the same time, what I didn't know was happening until a few months ago, with the 100 gig network fiber network connections between aisles, a computer, a server in one aisle can access the GPU on a server in a different aisle. Now, that used to be motherboard only kind of stuff. And now they make extra boards that fit in a GPU stuff that's optimized and built. NVIDIA is a big player in this. Optimized and built just to allow that to happen. So now you're talking about speeds and communication and so on. This is the kind of thing that makes robotic-assisted surgery possible because you have to respond not in seconds anymore, but in milliseconds. So you have to have computing at microsecond level, and that's a whole other subject. It's very interesting for a technical person, but won't always buy you lunch. So anyway, so this is where things are going. And if technology is advancing like it is and changing, we actually, I used to think this is impossible. How are we going to keep up with all that stuff? We don't have to. We can have a strategy based on risk that's, here are the risks we want to deal with. here's how technology could help us with that. It isn't here yet, but in the meantime, I'm going to take my stuff that's getting outdated and I need to rip and replace or whatever, the physical security stuff that's sitting out at the different sites. Some of it I want to move into the cloud, where that makes sense, but I want to make my system so that when a new thing comes out, I can just connect it up to it. And the other thing they've had is that every product, video management system software makers would have to have their own redundant recording servers technology, and then access control had their own redundant servers, and then every product had its own redundancy. Well, forget it. With this new, software-defined data center, essentially, everything is virtual. Everything is 5 nines or 4 nines or 6 nines, depending what you're buying and what you're set up to be. All your stuff runs 24 hours. All your stuff, you don't worry about hot plugging a drive and that you can't have security at the lobby door or something. You don't worry about any of that stuff because the systems are up and running and you can involve the infrastructure. So that's a capability, a technology capability that we should be looking at in physical security. Plus, the other element that's woven into it is automating the security configurations of everything and eliminating the human error element, because so many times that's what it's come back to. Somebody was configuring this or that or whatever. And now with switches, with all these things being software-defined network and everything else, you can have strategies, policies, and so on, and AI can manage it all for you, and even shift the network loads based on, the traffic that's been on it, and so on and so on. So there's no reason for security not to have that infrastructure, because that's the majority of what Dell is selling these days. So you actually get a really good price on it. It's not the same thing as a Kmart home PC or laptop or whatever, but still, it's a whole different story. And so huge difference in total cost of ownership and these other factors, future-proofing. So this is the official definition of autonomous compute infrastructure. I'm going to go right to the next thing because, but this is one reason this is a watershed moment for IT. It's been a problem that as we have more and more data centers, companies are more data-centric. Now they're doing digital transformation. You're just overloading everybody in IT. I mean, how can you keep up with the work? But if you don't have to deal with the stupid, idiot level kind of configurations and settings and changes and stuff, if that can be automatic, then your IT folks can be doing something smarter that you need to have done. And that's a big deal. And so this is a time when, remember how costs are going down? One of the costs is the cost to support a technology. Now we've hit a point where that cost is starting to, the technology has improved so much that the benefits have come up a level into the human interaction level with technology. So now we're going to see the difficulty. You could take a data center today and then take a data center we'll see 5 years from now that's 10 times bigger. You'll still need less people to run it, and it'll be easier, and there won't be mistakes. So those are the trends that are there. So that's the direction we would think in. And security needs to be involved in those kind of design concepts because we got to have security built in. And there's all kinds of initiatives and everything about it, but it's still considered, how do I want to say it? I've talked to a number of people that still consider it to be kind of a conceptual thing and an ideal thing, and it's pretty idealistic to think, we can build security into everything and all that. But why? We can build everything else. It's a feature, it's a configuration, so the automation is a big deal. But what they did is they developed 5 levels of automation, and this is why I am so jazzed about this thing that they did. Well, wait a minute. Here they are. So now here's what's funny. The parallel there, they had in one of their papers, they give a big acknowledgement to the Society of Automotive Engineers for their sharing their thinking on systems automation. And I thought, sure, these were the guys that were doing Convergence in 1974. Of course they're ahead of the game. Of course they know how to do all this stuff. So before, and especially with physical security systems, but with a lot of systems, it's sort of an all or nothing proposition. And how do you make the leap from here to there, cost-wise, budget-wise, time-wise, deployment-wise? How do you manage it? So this gives you a gradient. In fact, a new, how many of you have heard of a graph database, G-R-A-P-H? Okay. So Right Crowd just came out with a new product, Access Analytics. That's the database they use. You take any systems they have, any user information, whether it's Active Directory or a visitor management system or customer list that, customers that come in and out of a service center, whatever it is, you take all that stuff, you export it out as CSV files. And then they suck it into the graph database, and who cares about rows and columns or whatever it originally came from. They're going to put it in a way that they can check the access assignments of everybody against the policies you have in place, where you have a two-person rule, or you have separation of duties, or anything like this involved. In fact, there are places in Australia where they have mines that if you go into a building A and you're there for more than 8 hours, you can't go into building B or C for a week. If you do, you're going to breathe what's there, and then you'll be gone. So that level of thing, and where physical security has always been exempted from the audits, I see we're running 1 minute over, from the audits, they don't have to be anymore, because now this audits everything every day and can give you the exact results. I wonder if our technology turns off because it's overtime, maybe. So anyway, so it's a gradient scale that starts with some automation and then a little more, and then to full automation. So this allows you to assess the infrastructure, and for physical security to assess and say, we're going to move from one level of automation to the next, instead of going from no automation to total automation, because that's one of the lessons learned about that. It's not a Convergence one necessarily, but that's a pretty tough haul and a very rough project and so on. So these, you'll see these, you can download the slides, they're up there. These are the things that I talked about, that we talked about already. They're the convergence lessons for the security for technology convergence, this for security convergence. Here's one of the links to the cybersecurity and physical security convergence guide. These are the takeaways for CSOs, CTOs, and CISOs, meaning the physical security folks don't know enough to manage their infrastructure. John's painfully aware of that. So, well, not so painfully because you solved the problem, but yeah. So these, I've already covered these points, but again, because slides you want to take with you, you can stop and read it and see it. These are the different key takeaways there. And that's the list of convergence resources that you can get to. And thank you. Thank you for all your time and attention today. I'm glad you could make it.